So once again, welcome to the second day of our PFMA Spotlight and Public Debt Management in Transition States learning event, which started yesterday on a very high note. And today we are in day 2. My name is Sidwell Hoff. I'm the division manager of the Policy Management Division of the African Development Institute, which is organizing this event. I'll be the moderator of today's session. So as we may recall, yesterday, we started with an opening session, a wonderful opening session, which was moderated by our director, Dr. Eric Ogunleye, the director of the African Development Institute. We had opening remarks from the Vice President and Chief Economist of the African Development Bank, Professor Kevin Urama, who was represented by Mr. Bekale Olame, the principal CPO of the African Development Bank here in Ghana, country office. We also had remarks by the director of the Transitional States Coordination Office, Dr. Yero Balde, of course, who was represented by a colleague. We also had official opening by Dr. Cassiel Atofoson, the Minister of Finance, who was represented by the Deputy Minister of Finance, Honorable Thomas Yako. We had a wonderful presentation on the TSF project, which was led by Mr. Chidebere Ibe, who is the Senior Capacity Development Officer and also the task manager for the project, which is organizing this event. We then moved to a quite engaging policy dialogue, which started with the keynote presentations on sovereign debt restructuring experiences in Africa under the G20 Common Framework, which was made by Mr. Olivier Ponon, the Director and CEO of the African Legal Support Facility, ALSF, and also a presentation on loan negotiation experiences in Africa, what we need to know, which was delivered by Victor Oje, the legal counsel at ALSF. We had a wonderful, again, panel session, which was discussed by Mr. Olivier Ponon and great panelists from Zambia, Marianne, and Frederick from Ghana, Minister of Finance, and representative also from Chad, Mr. Mojitoje Donatien. We proceeded to the second panel, which was moderated by Victor Oje, and the panelists were Olivier Ponon, CEO and Director of ALSF, the representatives from Mozambique, Mr. Edgar Manhua, a representative from Gambia, Mr. Bakari Krubali, and representative from Central African Republic, Mr. Rodrigue Mabua Noyan. We ended up the day with a breakout session where we had deeper dive discussions of the experiences on loan negotiations and debt restructuring. Today we are going to proceed from here with report backs of what was discussed during those breakout sessions. So allow me at this time, without further ado, to call to come and lead the report backs of the breakout sessions yesterday. So thank you, Johan.
I'm actually a young man, but being for so long debt manager in South Africa made my hair very gray. So that's why I'm looking so old, but I'm still young. Okay, thanks for this opportunity. Can we just get the translations? Apparently there's some problems with the translation. We can just sort that out. Okay, so I just want to recap in terms of, and that will lead us nicely into our report back on our breakaway sessions. So yesterday we spoke about the different forms of restructuring. So we understand that there was some countries that went through debt relief. There's countries that went through debt restructuring, and other countries that went through a consolidation phase, and other countries went through a hybrid of consolidation and debt restructuring. So, so we also heard yesterday that that debt restructuring goes hand in hand with reforms and capacity building. So we also heard yesterday of the history that of debt relief and restructuring, starting way back when debt was accumulated in the 1980s, 1990s, the EPIC initiative, over $100 billion of debt that was wiped out. All of a sudden, the country's balance sheet looked very good, and they start borrowing again. So we heard that. So the balance sheet of the government was all of a sudden looking very well in the beginning of 2010, and with all the infrastructure developments that needs to take place, government starts to borrow again. And because there was space, and all of a sudden, in the early 2020, 21, we were soon running into a debt situation or a debt distress situation, which was soon to become problematic. So a few countries we spoke about the G20 that stepped in to assist countries with their DSSI initiative, followed by the common framework, and various countries made use of these sort of debt restructuring processes. So we understand that debt restructuring is a painful and a long process. We heard about the experiences of Ghana, Zambia, and Chad. The question is now, is there life after debt restructuring? And I quickly want to sort of just emphasize this. You know, I'm always promoting this. Whenever you hear me speaking, I always want to say it's get your house in order. And the reason why I'm saying that is there's still value in sound macro economic policies, monetary and fiscal policies. There's value in prudent policies and strategies. There's value in sound practices, processes, and controls. And through that, you're able to build trust and credibility. And guess what will happen when there's trust and credibility? Your borrowing costs will come down. And so the problem is really sometimes is not the amount of debt that you accumulate, but is at the price that you accumulate this debt. So African countries to borrow cheaper, it's really about to get your house in order so that your ratings can improve, and also creditors will offer you cheaper borrowing rates. But yeah, so it's a long process. In my experience in South Africa with all the reforms, at one stage in my life, we were borrowing at 22% in the debt capital, in the domestic market in South Africa. We started our reforms, so eventually we brought it down to 5% through various reforms. So we have now, yesterday, further discussions on this topic, and through the breakaway sessions. And I'm going to invite now the rapporteurs of those sessions to give us, each of them, a summary version of what was discussed yesterday. So we had yesterday 4 breakaway groups, moderated by John Padu, session group 1, Morina Sunisi, Dr. Friday Uchis, and Aida Hanatu Baint Musa. And we call up now the rapporteurs, Kamara, Sabutsu, Al-Haji, and Adam.
Good morning, dear colleague and friend. And the rapporteur of Group 1 is about to present the conclusion of the exchanges that took place within the group. I want to say that I have the privilege to monitor discussion exchanges within the group, and it was very interesting, informative, and due to time constraint, I'm not going to take long. I'm going to yield the floor to Kamaria, who will present the summary of the exchanges that took place. I will say that the group is comprised of 6 Francophone countries. You have Burundi, you have Burkina Faso, you have Chad, you have Djibouti, Central African Republic, and Congo, DRC. So, Kamaria, vous pouvez venir pour pouvoir présenter les conclusions des discussions du groupe 4. Du groupe 1, merci.
Merci, bonjour tout le monde. Alors, les groupes qui ont constitué, les pays qui ont constitué le groupe 1 ont déjà été présentés par le modérateur. Les sessions de travail du groupe 1 ont porté sur les défis de la négociation de prêts et de la restructuration de la dette, les mesures mises en œuvre par les pays pour gérer les négociations de prêts et la restructuration de la dette, les besoins en renforcement de capacités et les options politiques pour améliorer la négociation de prêts et la restructuration de la dette dans les pays. Pour ce qui concerne les défis de négociation de prêts et de la restructuration de la dette, les pays ont noté les demandes de garantie, les primes de risque élevées, ainsi que les conditions drastiques demandées par les créanciers potentiels. On a aussi noté la rareté des ressources des emprunts concessionnels. Les types de financements recherchés sont des financements concessionnels, mais les prix proposés sont souvent à des taux variables de 5%, alors que les prêts reçus étaient à des taux de 1%. On a aussi noté le nombre de conditions souvent drastiques imposées par les créanciers, qui fait rallonger la plupart du temps les durées des négociations de prêt. Il y a aussi la pression politique du fait de la forte affluence des commerciaux et la rigidité et l'étroitesse du marché domestique. Comme choc externe, nous avons noté la crise sécuritaire sous-régionale qui a provoqué une augmentation des dépenses en matière de défense nationale. Il y a aussi la maladie à coronavirus, les tensions mondiales entre les USA et la Chine, la guerre en Irak et les bouleversements géopolitiques, la chute des prix des matières premières, les chocs climatiques ainsi que les crises humanitaires. Pour ce qui concerne les mesures mises en œuvre par les pays pour gérer la négociation de prêt, nous avons identifié, entre autres, la mise en place d'un cadre formel incluant la désignation des personnes habilitées compétentes pour les négociations de prêt, dont les juristes et les personnes en charge des finances. Nous avons aussi identifié la mise en place d'un cadre législatif, d'un cadre légal et institutionnel de gestion de la dette qui devra être aligné sur les meilleures pratiques internationales. Dans notre groupe, il n'y a eu que 3 pays qui en disposent, dont le Burkina Faso, le Burundi et la RDC. On a aussi identifié comme mesures devant être prises par les pays pour gérer la négociation de la dette, d'entreprendre l'analyse de la viabilité de la dette, effectuer l'audit des opérations de la dette au moins une fois l'année, de s'assurer que l'emprunt figure dans le plan d'emprunt annuel de la stratégie de gestion de la dette et de communiquer régulièrement avec les créanciers intérieurs et extérieurs. Pour ce qui concerne les besoins de renforcement de capacités pour la négociation de prêts et la restructuration de la dette, les lacunes que nous avons identifiées pour cette session concernent la faiblesse du cadre de coordination de la gestion de la dette et des politiques fiscales, macroéconomiques et monétaires. On a aussi identifié les besoins de renforcement des capacités humaines et le problème de la mobilité des cadres, de la rétention des personnes ressources. Comme outil et méthodologie, nous avons identifié l'analyse de viabilité de la dette et donc les logiciels pour la stratégie de la dette à moyen terme, la formulation de stratégies de la gestion de la dette, l'analyse du taux de rentabilité des projets financés par les emprunts. Et finalement, en termes d'options politiques pour améliorer la négociation de prêts, nous avons souligné la nécessité de renforcer le cadre de coordination de la gestion de la dette publique avec les politiques, donc portant sur la macroéconomie, la fiscalité et monétaire, et la mise en place d'un cadre d'identification et de suivi passif éventuel. On a aussi identifié l'adoption d'un cadre budgétaire rigoureux qui devra inclure une bonne maîtrise des dépenses publiques, une forte mobilisation des ressources internes et un niveau soutenable du déficit budgétaire principal, source d'endettement. Nous avons également identifié une demande d'assistance formulée vis-à-vis des partenaires pour un appui technique dans les négociations avec les créanciers et un programme de renforcement continu des capacités dans les domaines de négociation de prêts. Je vous remercie. Les membres du groupe 1 qui sont présents dans la salle pourront rajouter des éléments en cas d'omission de notre part. Merci. Merci, monsieur.
Je pense que notre ami Kamaria a fini la présentation. Any question or any follow-up or any clarification? Otherwise, that was a summary of the conclusion of the exchange that took place within the Group 1.
All right, let's go to Group 3. Dr. Friday and the rapporteur Al-Haji.
Good morning, everyone. I moderated Group 3, made up of Mozambique, Liberia, Eritrea, and Gambia. I now call on Al-Haji, who is the rapporteur, to present our conclusions.
So the breakout session was It was commenced with brief introductions from the moderator, who then guided participants into an insightful discussions on challenges and approaches to loan negotiation and debt restructuring across various African countries. So the discussions highlighted were as follows. Number one, challenges in loan negotiation and restructuring. And for Liberia, the points were, number one, they faced a lot of difficulties consolidating and streamlining existing debts. And number two, lack of economic and political will impedes reform efforts. And for Eritrea, the first point, limited human resources and also limited technical capacity. And secondly, external creditors often bring their own auditors, which sidelines national oversight. And number three, the local farms are disadvantaged in project procurement despite competitive bidding clauses. And for Gambia, concessional loan access is very restricted. And second point, exchange rate fluctuations exacerbate debt servicing, and there's limited expertise in Islamic finance, and multi-donor capital-intensive projects present coordination challenges. And for Mozambique, there's high reliance on multinational and concessional loans, and investor confidence is very weak. Elevated credit risk and lack of political will slow progress. For solutions and good practices shared, Eritrea, the participants proposed a local content law to promote the inclusion of domestic farms in project execution. And the general experiences were as follows. Some countries succeeded in restructuring by maintaining focus on their goals, and consensus emerged that restructuring without fiscal and budget policy reform is ineffective. And one speaker emphasized that many countries have fiscal, not debt problems. And the key messages were as follows. Corruption remains a central issue in undermining debt sustainability despite resource endowment. And structural reform and policy coherence are necessary to ensure that debt supports growth. They highlighted, someone in particular highlighted the transition from LIBOR to SOFR and its implications, and there's emphasis on the role of efficient tax collection in managing and restructuring public debt. And they underlined the need for investment efficiency, warning against acquiring debt for non-productive ventures. And country takeaways and recommendations. So, fiscal programs must be, for Gambia, fiscal programs must be designed to generate surpluses and enshrined in law. For Mozambique, strengthened law enforcement against corruption, enact fiscal measures for domestic revenue mobilization, and improved transparency and accountability. And for Liberia, legal experts must be actively involved in loan negotiations and restructuring. So I would like to ask if I've missed any point.
Yeah, that was the challenges we identified, the recommendations made based on the specific challenges that was highlighted in each of the countries, and then identified some of those recommendations that can address the challenges we identified. So if there is any comment on the presentation, we are here to take one or two questions if there is any. If there is none, then let us have another round of applause for him.
Thank you, Dr. Friday and Alhaji. Now let's go to to Group 4.
Good morning. I moderated for Group 4, and in Group 4, we had South Sudan, Sierra Leone, Madagascar, Zimbabwe, and Somalia. The rapporteur is Adam Aikuta. It's like he's not here. He prepared all our findings, but I may have to summarize what I had. In terms of challenges in assessing new loans, most of the countries in our group had similar challenges. The fact that some debt offices are not well structured, the representatives that go for loan negotiations at times are the political officers, that is the political heads, that had little or nothing to do with debt management. So if you carry maybe a politician or a parliamentarian to go for loan negotiation, they don't know anything about that. They know little or nothing about that. Let me just say nothing. You find out that the terms and conditions that are being negotiated are not favorable. This is one of the problems. So for us in DMO Nigeria, I always draw our example. We insisted that debt officers should be part of the team that go for loan negotiation, so that when we look at the terms and conditions, it can be properly assessed by debt officers. My rapporteur is here, but then let me just continue to say we also have challenges in terms of debt restructuring processes. One of the challenges is capacity. So the countries in our group, many of them had the same issues, the same challenges as enumerated before, because lack of capacity. You don't even know the terms and conditions of loan restructuring, and most of the times they depend on development partners. Before I call on my rapporteur, another issue is capacity building. The groups we requested for assistance from Africa Development Bank, also from ASLF, to send technical assistance to their countries. 1 week or 2 weeks of training is not enough. They feel that if we're able to get people to their country to handhold them, maybe for a period of 6 months or 1 year, they should be able to learn to learn something appreciable. On this note, let me just call on my rapporteur to conclude.
I suspect many of the things I will be saying, you have already heard from our moderator. But I have the notes in terms of what specific countries indicated as their challenges and their requirements. So I will just focus on those so that I don't take too much time. Okay. The first thing that kind of jumped at us was when South Sudan indicated the kind of thing they faced, which I'm sure is symptomatic across the board is the fact that being a new country, I mean, you can imagine, it doesn't matter what status of a country or your debt situation. If you are new, there are so many interrelated problems. Capacity issues, obviously, because some of them who are even working in relation to debt were in Sudan, and then suddenly now they were in control of the debt department in South Sudan. Okay, but specifically with regard to debt restructuring or loan negotiations, the immediate challenge they faced was ability to negotiate with creditors. And some of the unscrupulous creditors knew this. And so they took advantage of it and pushed a lot of unfavorable terms on the country. And so within a short time, the country was facing debt challenges, right? And so what is clear, in fact, this is one request that the countries, many countries expressed. In addition to the specific idea of the Accra group of countries in terms of debtors. Okay, right. Okay, apart from the problem of, the requirement for, say, an Accra group of debtors, one of the requests that was made was for countries, kind of as a general framework, there should be an arrangement when a country wants to negotiate some new loans or new debt restructuring. They contact ASLF so that it shouldn't be something that you do only when there are specific difficulties. Because we know that most countries have challenges. Even when staff have been trained, the staff are always moving. So when you are going for some serious new loan negotiations, you should be able to contact ASLF. The minimum thing you can do is at least get some specific training and support with regard to what you are doing. But I think the idea of even having them on board with regard to what you are doing, the terms, like when you get the terms from the creditors, you can negotiate those, kind of pass on those terms to ASLF, and they can assist you to point out certain challenges. So that is a requirement that many countries have actually asked for. One specific thing that was asked, just in case I run out of time, is to be able for countries to be able to do an exchange program. It should be like an established thing. Countries that have got a lot of experience should avail that experience to other countries who can now visit for a short time, 1 month, and so forth, assisted by, obviously, ADB. So that's a specific requirement that was expressed. And I think, obviously, you can never overdo training. But one country specifically asked for training in DAC and long-term technical assistance, because they think the kind of technical assistance that comes for a short time doesn't provide them enough support for them to be able to do the DAC on their own. So some long-term technical assistance, then of course with capacity building in-house, so that when the expert leaves, they will be able to conduct the DAC on their own. So I think at this point, in order not to overshoot the time, in case there are questions, I can do further.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Hanatu. Thanks for the inputs. Let's go to Morina. Okay. Group 2.
Thanks, Mr. Zan. Thanks, audience. I have the honor to moderate the group, the second group. The second group is composed by 24 participants belonging to 5 countries, which are Niger, Guinea-Conakry, Comoros, Mali, and Togo. Our discussion were very interesting, very constructive, and we shared a lot of experience between each other. Actually, we have answered and discussed the question related to strategy and solution that has been implemented by their countries, and we learned a lot from them. Then they highlighted their needs in capacity building to improve their ability to negotiate and restructure their own debt. We have discussed also policy option for improving loan negotiation and debt restructuring. So all the details related to our discussion and answers will be presented by my colleague Cebu. I will give him the floor to give us presentation. And I would like also to thank Mr. Omar Bari from Guinea-Conakry for his help and for his ability also. Thank you, audience. Yeah, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So I had the honor to be the rapporteur for Group 2, as Madam Munira has already mentioned. So within the time limit that have just been provided to me by the moderator, I'll try and get straight into it. So in terms of the loan negotiation and debt restructuring challenges, I'm going to give what comes out as a summary from what the groups, the country groupings gave out. So we have the first one is some of the countries expressed difficulties with understanding the terms and conditions of the loans or the grants or whatever it is that they will be getting into. So it is important that they be helped with that. Some complained in terms of the challenges, the commitment fees and commission that usually is charged for some of the loans, they find or deem those to be too high. Also, with the agreements or the orientation by the different donors when they come to the countries, they come with prescribed areas where they want to intervene, which may not be that convenient to the countries. So they found that to be a challenge, and almost all the countries are exposed to, well, different external shocks. Some of them in the recent past coup d'etats in some of the countries. Those have been issues that have contributed to affecting their debt. COVID-19, internal security issues in some countries, whereby you find that the displacement of people usually affects even the way projects are done themselves, in that a project will be planned in a certain region, but due to insecurity issues and lack of stability, it is cancelled or has to be moved to another region. Then it becomes costly because the government has to then go back into doing feasibility studies and all that. One other challenge is the human capacity challenge, as well as the technical capacity challenge. That came out especially when it comes to legal and legislative frameworks. Some cited the rigid conditions set by the creditors as hindering their sufficient or adequate debt management implementation. On the capacity issue, in terms of the human capacity, some indicated the access to some of the technical assistance seems to be not easy to access, if I may put it that way. So they require the ALSF to really come through to help them deal with that. In terms of the recommendations and solutions or strategies that are in place in the different countries, we found that most of the countries have, to a large extent, a debt management strategy, which then guides as to how the whole process of that should be done. There is an interdisciplinary technical team that usually deals with the negotiations, ranging from Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning all the way to the Office of the Primature, I don't know in English how we call that, or the Premier, the Prime Minister in some other countries. And the reporting structures in some of those are such that there's different phases to win the negotiations. Pre-negotiations, where the technical team meets to try and think largely about the whole negotiations, then the negotiations itself, and then post-negotiations, whereby now it is more of evaluating the outcomes of the negotiations. We found that some other countries did very well into renegotiating agreements with the creditors in terms of debt refinancing, whereby one of the countries ended up having 75% of the debt cancelled, and then they had to just refinance the remaining 25%. We saw some reforms being implemented in some countries whereby they formulated their debt management offices into front, middle, and back office to be able to delineate between what each has to do. The capacity needs, that would be the third category that I want to get into, seem to cut across. There is a need for technical assistance, especially as it relates to legal capacity for debt management, loan negotiations, and debt restructuring. I think that has what has come out of the other presentations that have been presented already. There is a need for assistance with the necessary tools, both for analysis and even for debt management and recording itself. There is still need in some countries to help them with development of their medium-term strategies. There is also a need to develop procedure manuals in some countries, and then, as I've already mentioned, assistance with the necessary tools to be able to arrive at managing their debt and loan negotiations very well. Quickly going on to the policy options and the recommendations. One of the key recommendations was for countries to embark on a strategy to diversify their creditors. So it means countries should go on maybe road shows to be able to attract different types of creditors, which can then help in getting at least at times favorable terms from the different donors. Training and mobilization of funds for training, because that is a huge capacity deficiency that was highlighted. Reinforcing the strategies on debt transparency, loan negotiation, and debt restructuring. Reinforcing the governance and performance of the budget. And there was one country which highlighted on the need to train the different or several the other ministries on economic diplomacy, in that we find at times different ministries getting into discussions with the donors and creditors without clearly understanding the ins and outs of the economy, and that should be left to the Ministry of Finance. As in one country, we discovered that there is actually a law that was put in place to actually designate the Ministry of Economy and Finance as the only entity that could contract or was allowed to contract debt. So it is one of the good strategies that was implemented in the other countries. So this economic diplomacy goes along the same lines in ensuring that everything that we contract as debt is aligned with the national development goals, and that is what is usually being driven by the Ministry of Economy and Finance / planning in some other countries. One of the key recommendations or policy options was to try and elevate the status of ALSF, because most countries seem not to be aware of really what it does and how they can then gain access from it. Of course, we heard yesterday how the CEO indicated how to gain access to that, but they want the status to be elevated for it to be like the go-to institute or institution where loan negotiations and debt restructuring in Africa should not happen if ALSF is not involved, because it is an institution that is created to protect the interests of African countries against donors and creditors. Last one is on the reconsideration of the G20 framework to make it practical, flexible, and seemingly more accommodating to the needs to suit the best interests of the African countries. And of course, last but not least, countries should also make efforts to avoid being indebted, with a focus on increasing domestic resource mobilization and managing their expenditures. And one way of being able to do that is by adopting program-based budgeting, which other countries in Africa are already implementing. Thank you very much, Ms. Moderator, and thank you very much, Madam Munira.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. I think Sitwell and Chichiperi and Dr. Eric, the show is on the road. There's a mountain to climb. Let's climb that mountain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, the breakout session group, chairs and rapporteurs. So thank you very much for the wonderful presentation of what came out from the breakout sessions. I think you can agree with me that, these discussions were quite, deep and illustrious. So we continue to today's program. So at this time, we are going to move to session 6 in day 2. If you look at your program, session 6 of today's program. And for this, we are going to have a presentation on the overview of the African debt landscape and deficiencies in the international debt architecture. And this is going to be presented by Dr. Keba Jame, who is a senior economist, senior research economist in our research department. So it's going to present virtually. I think he's virtually connected right now. So he's going to make the presentation now. But let me just highlight the other presentations which will come later so that I can wait a bit of your appetite and you have some expectation. So after session 6, we are going to have session 7, which is going to be presented by Chidebere on the need for borrowing and using debt productively. We'll take a short break after that, and we'll move to session 8, which will focus on the role of strong institutional, legal, and regulatory framework and capacity for debt management. And this will be presented by none other than Victor Oje, the legal counsel at ALSF. So this will actually take us to around lunchtime. And after enjoying our lunch, we'll come back quickly and move on to session 9, which will focus on instruments for effective debt management. The tools like DSA, the MDTS, the annual borrowing plans, and this will be presented by Hajia Hanatu Musa. I think you have seen her, one of our faculty members. And then we'll move to session 9. We'll move to session 10, which will focus on improving debt transparency, especially with the use of electronic tools such as CSD, RMS, or Meridian, DEMFAS in transition countries. I think we are already aware of most of these tools, and this will be presented by Dr. Adam Aikuta. And after this presentation, this will take us to the breakout sessions. And for today's breakout sessions, we'll focus more on the some hands-on, demonstration and exercises related to what we have been discussed in terms of the, instruments for effective debt management, and also the use of electronic tools in debt management in transition countries. So we'll further share our experiences as we undertake these exercises. So this is a quick run out of the day. So without taking much time, let me call upon Dr. Keba Jame to make his presentation. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, colleagues. Thank you all for joining us today. I am delighted to welcome you to this important conversation on Africa's debt landscape and the deficiencies in international debt architecture. Yeah, my name is Keba Jame. I'm a research economist with the AFDB. So let me move to the next slide. So over the next few minutes, we will be unpacking some of the structural and systematic issues that shapes debt dynamics in most African countries. And we will also briefly discuss why the current global framework is not very fit for purpose. So the outline of our discussions will be, we will start with a brief introduction, and then we will look at the dynamics or the drivers of public debt in African countries. We will discuss some debt challenges in the continent, and then we will highlight some of the deficiencies in the international debt architecture. And then we will discuss briefly on some public policies and strategies to reduce our debt, and then we will have our conclusion. So as an introduction, we know that Africa has huge financing needs. This financing needs reflects the urgent and growing demand for financing to support the continent's development objectives. It is no news that we all know that the continent faces significant investment gaps in infrastructure, healthcare, energy, education, climate resilience, and then the list goes on. So with a growing population and urbanization rate, the need for financing to build roads, power grids, schools, hospitals is also immense. Additionally, countries require resources to recover from the global shocks such as the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and rising debt burdens. So, given this financing needs, one of the ways to bridge or to close the financing gap is to, when domestic resources and development assistance are not sufficient, is through debt. So it is observed that between 2010 and 2024, Africa's total public debt increases by roughly 170% to surpass $1.8 trillion US. This is partly due to external shocks such as global financial, such as the 2008 global financial crisis and its aftermath effects. COVID-19 crisis and the geopolitical tensions. And in addition, increased borrowing costs, FX depreciations, lower demand for exports, and volatility in commodity prices also led to increased borrowing needs and debt level stocks. But it is important to highlight that debt is not bad. Debt is not bad because it can be a useful tool to finance development, especially when it is used strategically. Borrowings allows government to invest in long-term projects that boost economic growth and improve livelihoods. It's just like households and businesses that can also help smooth spending, respond to shocks, and then seize economic opportunities, or social economic opportunities. But the key, however, is how debt is managed. If it is used for productive purpose, and if it is kept at sustainable level, it can support development. However, if debt is excessive, poorly used, or lack transparency, its impact or consequences can be very severe. We know the phenomenon called the debt trap, where countries have to borrow to finance debt, borrow at higher rates to refinance debt. So, I mean, if that is very unsustainable, if it reaches very unsustainable debt levels, its consequences can be very bad. Yeah, it may lead to social and human development setbacks. It can weaken economic growth and low productivities. Yeah, so this is why we always want to avoid being at a state where our debt level is unsustainable. So we can briefly move on to the dynamics and the composition and drivers of public debt in Africa. So as it can be seen in the axis in the figure on the right, that is the one on the upper side, Africa debt level increases from almost roughly $600 billion in 2010 to in excess of $1.8 trillion in 2022. If you can notice, since 2019, or even before that, that has been the trajectory has been upward sloping. Yeah, so this is recently, if we focus on, let's say, post 2019, this surge is mostly due to higher borrowing needs. Yeah. So what you can see this increment in growth. It is like a linear figure that is just upward sloping with no breaks. And this is the nominal value of debt, which is of importance. Some people tend to focus sometimes on debt to GDP, but that may not reflect the true nature of our problems, because if you look at, let's say, from since 2020, 2021, 2022, debt to GDP has been declining in some countries only because of high inflation rate. Because if you use debt to GDP as an indicator, the GDP you use is nominal GDP, and your GDP can increase not because of your nominal GDP can increase not because of increased economic activities, but just because of higher prices, which will lead to a downward sloping debt to GDP ratio. Although it is an important indicator, we don't pay debt from our debt to GDP. We pay debt from our revenue sources, and this is where the negative effects of debt can be very severe. So, with this increase in debt, there has been rising concern on debt sustainability. Because if you look at the figure on the bottom, between 2010 to 2025, you see the number of countries, African countries, that are at low risk of debt distress, moderate, high, and in debt distress. Over 20 African countries are either at high risk of debt distress or they are already in this debt distress. For example, in 2010, we had 11 countries who were at low low risk of debt distress, but in 2025 we have none. So most of these 11 countries have now been captured in these 11 countries that have moderate risks. If you look at 2010, we only had 12 African countries that are at moderate risks, and now we have 17. When we go to high risk, it was 8. Now, as of 2025, it is 14. And then if you look at the countries in debt distress, it was 5 in 2010. Although there were some dynamics between 2010 to 2025, but as of now, we have 7 countries in debt distress. So these are some of the direct facts that we have in most African countries. So, as I already stated, debt vulnerabilities remain high because of one of the reasons why debt is growing high is because of the growing shift in Africa's debt composition. Debt has now been diversified beyond traditional multilateral and Paris Club members, Paris Club creditors, to include more private sector, more private bondholders and non-traditional creditors like China and India. So the changing composition of debt towards commercial debt has been accompanied by an increase in the dollar domination, which is worsening our debt service cost. So let's look at the composition in terms of public debt. So we have 3 figures. At least the first one on the left is where we have domestic debt versus external debt. If you look as of 2023, almost 60% of Africa's total debt is domestic, and the other 40% is external. So, almost 60% is external, and the remaining 40% is domestic. So, external debt exposes us to exchange rate risks, as we all know, and then rising global interest rates. In most of our discussions, sometimes people say we tend to rely on external debt because of the interest rate parity. Interest rates on external debt is low, but that is at the nominal rate. So when considering the external debt, you don't only focus on the nominal interest rate. You focus on the effective interest rate, and the effective interest rate will be the nominal interest rate plus the rate of depreciation of your local currency. And in some African countries, in a lot of African countries, over the past 10-15 years, our currencies have depreciated by more than 200%. So if you have a very high rate of depreciation, it doesn't make sense for you to consider the cost of external debt as the nominal interest rate. It should be the effective rate, which is the nominal interest rate, plus the rate of your currency depreciation, because it tells you what is the real cost of external debt. And when we move to domestic debt, it has also been increasing recently because it is used to reduce foreign currency exposure, but it also comes at a very high interest rate. And in most of our countries, it comes to it comes with very short maturities. So it exposes us to this rollover risks where we have to borrow to fully finance risks. So we have also discussed that in the previous slide that the shift towards commercial borrowing also makes debt servicing more expensive. Yeah, if you look at the figure on the middle, where we have concessional and commercial debt, you can say commercial debt dominates. Yeah, commercial debt dominates, and especially in countries, especially in terms of Euro bonds and syndicate loans, they make now a substantial part of our debt portfolio, especially in middle-income African countries like Ghana and Zambia. So if we look at maturities, as I was trying to highlight, short-term maturities create refinancing risks, especially in countries that have limited capital market access. On the external part, private debt often comes with high interest rate due to high risk perceptions, partly because of unfavorable risk ratings of many African countries. So if you look at this figure, we have like the coupon rate, and then the tenor. So you can see it is mostly concentrated between 5 to 10% interest rate, with majority most of them between 2 years to 10 years. So you can see how it goes. So let's move to the drivers of public debt. So we conducted a debt decomposition analysis, which shows that debt dynamic has been driven by the depreciation of exchange rate, high primary deficits, and growing interest rate. Cumulatively, primary deficit has been the main drivers of Africa's sovereign debt since the beginning of the last decade, followed by interest rate expenses and exchange rate depreciation. However, the relative importance of public debt drivers in Africa has evolved over the years. In 2020, for example, primary deficit, apart from other sources, which I will discuss in a minute, apart from these other sources, we can see that primary deficit is one of the main drivers of public debt in Africa. So what explains this others in 2020? This is partly explained by the debt service suspension initiative that was implemented in May 2020 to December 2021. So debt service suspension helps in trying to reduce the fiscal pressure when it comes to debt servicing, debt payments, on the its immediate effects. But it also has a negative impact on your debt stock, because when you suspend debt services, what happens is you are suspending your amortization payments, which is low, but you are still receiving disbursements. So when disbursements are more than your amortization payments, so your debt stocks increases. Although in the short term you would benefit from, although in the short term you benefit from increased fiscal space, but in the long term or even in the immediate term, it increases your debt stock. So sometimes I agree with what the participant from South Africa was saying. Debt service suspension is not the solution. Debt restructuring is not the solution. The solution would be that we put our house in order, as he stated. But we will get back. We will get back to that. So if we look at the factors that led to decreasing debt to GDP ratio in Africa, that is from zero downwards, that is 0, -5, -10, -15. We can see predominantly two components, which is the gray color inflation and the blue color real inflation, real GDP growth. So strong economic resilience and then strong growth above the world average in recent years has helped to moderate the pace of debt accumulation. That is debt to GDP. But if you look, for example, if we focus on the graph on the right side, which has the cumulative effect, you can see that most of the decline in debt to GDP is driven by inflation rate. Yeah, it is not because of structural changes that our debt to GDP has been declining. It is purely because of nominal changes, which sends a signal that is also kind of worrying, because the debt picture is not improving because of conscious actions that we are doing. It is just because of things that we are because of high inflation rates. So to conclude in this particular slide, we can see that interest rate, exchange rate depreciation, high primary deficits are the main drivers of debt accumulation in Africa. So when it comes to debt accumulation, in quote, in the form of declining debt to GDP ratio, it is mostly driven by high inflation rate. We will now move on quickly to the debt challenges that we have in the continent. So for me, the most important challenge that we have when it comes to debt management is limited domestic resource mobilization. Yes, it is part of it, and then we have weak debt management and governance framework. You can never underestimate the importance of governance in debt management. I was working at the Ministry of Finance, so I was exposed to the realities of debt management. We are also increasingly exposed to external shocks that have amplified Africa's debt vulnerability. If we look at low debt mobilization, Africa has one of the lowest tax to GDP ratios in the world. We have one of the, in most African countries, our tax to GDP ratio is below 15%. In other countries, it is the domestic revenue to GDP ratio is below 15%, which is well below the global average. So this leaves the government heavily reliant on borrowing to finance essential services and infrastructural development. If you look at the figure on the left, you can see tax to GDP ratio, Africa average is like 14.8%, and you compare it with Latin America, it's 24.8%, and you compare it with Central Europe and Central Asia, which is as high as 19.9%. So relatively, we outperform, if I can use the word, South Asia and East Asia and the Pacific. Another challenge comes from tightening global financial conditions. Although the conditions are improving, but we know that this has, with the change in composition of the public debt, especially going towards external debt, increase in the Fed rates and increase in the policy rates in the developed country, do lead to higher costs of borrowing. So then the third risk is depreciation of the local currencies, which increases the burden, of foreign debt. If you look at the figure on the right, extreme right corner, we can see the performance of African currencies versus the US dollar. So what we did was we used weights to generate the average basket of African currencies, and then that is the average basket. So this is we are not focusing on any African currency. We are using the currencies of African countries vis-a-vis with the US dollar, and then we base it so that at the beginning would be at 100%. So you can see from February 2019 to as June 2014, the average basket of African currencies represent only 65% of their total. Here you can see African currencies lost most of their value. So if you look at we moved from 100 to 90%, and then it was a little bit stabilized, and now the value of African country, the value of the basket of African currencies is like roughly 60% of what it used to be. Yeah, in 2014, and 2014 was like five years ago. Yeah, so you can see the rate of depreciation in African countries. So exchange rate risk has also intensified for many African countries due to the weakening of their domestic currencies driven by high global interest rate, and rollover risks have increased. In 2024, African countries spent almost 74 billion on debt servicing, up from 17 billion in 2010. Of these 74 billion, 40 billion US dollars is owed to private creditors, and 54%, which is like 54% of total debt services. Yeah. So you can see the increment cost of private debt to private creditors. So apart from this risk, we also have another risk that comes from climate change and climate vulnerabilities. Climate vulnerabilities have contributed to the buildup of debt in Africa. So if you look at sovereign debt interest rates for the most climate vulnerable countries have been found to be higher than they should be if only macro and fiscal indicators are considered. This situation leads to a vicious cycle in which countries must borrow, in which countries must devote more resources to repay their debt, and therefore this extra costs undermine their capacity to invest in climate change and adaptation and to address the losses and damages. African countries with high debt burden often face higher interest rates, higher rates of debt, finance climate-related projects. Yeah. So debt instruments, that is what we have on the right side, the figure on the right. Debt instruments have been increasingly used to finance climate-related projects in Africa. And this should be a major concern because we should not contract debt to finance climate actions. If you look at it, Africa provides a lot of climate-related services to the world that it is not compensated for. So given that we are among the least contributors to climate change, it would be unfair in quotation to use debt to finance the climate-related projects. Yeah. So these are among the challenges that we have when it comes to debt management. Yeah. So we also have high cost of debt services is heightening the severity of the body. Debt service costs have increased in many African countries, which narrows the scope for governments to spend on infrastructure and to invest in human capital and other social sectors, invest in human capital development. This also leads to increasing our debt vulnerabilities. The continent's average debt service payment rose to 13.2% in between 2020 and 2022, relative to 9.9% in 2015-2019. Debt service costs rose in most African countries. If you look at, for example, Senegal, it increased from 11% between 2015 to 2019 to 20.5% of revenue in 2020-2022. We observed a similar situation in Egypt, which increases to 18% of total government revenue from 10.9% in 2015-2019. Kenya, similarly, it also increases from 11.4% to 13.7% in 2020-2022. So, resource channeled towards debt service have eroded fiscal space, further constraining government capacity to invest in growth promoting sectors and human capital development. Education and health, two areas where average public expenditure on the continent is below that of other comparable regions. So apart from Egypt, we have some scenarios for Cote d'Ivoire. You have Morocco, South Africa, and Nigeria. So these are calculated using data from the World Bank International Debt Statistics database. So, but it will be important to note that despite recent easing of global financial conditions, external financing conditions remain tight, and debt vulnerabilities remain elevated. So you can see it is since 2024, the early months of 2024, there were policy rates in many central banks in developed countries started to be relaxed. But in recent years, it has been stabilized. Yeah. So after successful return, so because of a reduction downward trend in the spread, some African countries have gone back to the bond markets. Yeah, we can use the examples of Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, and Kenya. They have entered the Euro bond market in the first quarter of 2024. Senegal has also successfully raised 750 million US dollars through its Euro bond issuance in June 2024. However, with significant debt service payments falling due in 2025 and 2026, even in 2024, most of the issuance were meant to refinance early Euro bond issues. But this is done at a higher interest rate. Yeah, so here what we are doing is we are borrowing at a higher interest rate to finance maturing Euro bond that were issued earlier. Moreover, borrowing costs remains high and comes with this is just what I was trying to say. So there is the need to work to look more inward in managing debt. So if we look at the liquidity challenges in the short to the medium term, for example, between 2025 and 2026, that is in the short term, we are expecting African countries to pay almost 21 billion US dollars in these 2 years on. You can see, and then you can see the composition by countries. Yeah, with the countries colors that are here. So this is mostly here. It is mostly dominated by, you can see Cote d'Ivoire is playing a very important role. Yeah. So, but in the medium term, that is between 2027 to 2034, the refinancing need will approximate. It's estimated to be on average $7.5 billion per annum. Yeah? So and then this distribution is here based on this majority. So this funding, this liquidity problems are partly due to existing international financial architecture that has not been able to mobilize stable and long-term consistent finance at affordable rates. For instance, if you look at access to emergency financing, it is mostly skewed to mainly towards the benefit of developed countries, which need it the least. If we look at the COVID crisis, it provided a very good example.
Sorry, Keba, if you could wind up in the next few minutes. Thank you.
In the next few minutes, yeah, just give me 5 minutes extra. Yeah, just during COVID-19, African countries collectively received like 4.5% of the IMF general allocations of almost 65 billion US dollars on special on their SDR. That is the special drawing rights. Yeah. So this, if just given the time constraint, maybe I will just move on to identify some deficiencies in the international debt architecture. So these are some of the shortcomings that hindered effective and fair debt resolutions for African countries. For key among them is the lack of coordination. I will just listen and then I will move on. Lack of coordination among creditors and insufficient inclusion of private sector. So delays in debt resolution is also another problem. This is partly because the system is very reactive than being preemptive. This is also explained because of you have in our toolbox, in our debt management toolbox, we don't have preemptive instruments that can be used to preempt debt restructuring. And then we also have the one size fits all approach to debt restructuring, so these are some of the deficiencies in the international debt architecture. But one important one is the over-reliance of austerity when it comes to debt management and its inadequate linkage to the SDG. So it is good to highlight that in our debt management, debt restructuring conversations, there is this link between debt management or debt restructuring with the Sustainable Development Goals. So if we're looking at the policies, I will start by saying that there is no alternative to sound macroeconomic governance. Yeah. So this is, in other words, this is to say putting our house in order. If you look at because of weak governance, Africa loses almost $90 billion on illicit financial flows, almost $148 billion on corruption, $217 billion on international profit shifting and base erosions, and $74 billion because of poor risk perceptions. If you total this, it gives you a total of $587 billion. And if you look at the external financial inflows that Africa receives, yeah, it is estimated at $174 billion. So what we are losing because of weak governance is higher than what we are receiving from external sources. So this tells us that to effectively manage our debt, we need to look more inwards. It should be inward looking than being outward looking. So DRM, domestic resource mobilization, should be one of the key focus of in our effort to address our debt vulnerabilities. DRM should be, and then we have seen how we can strengthen that capacity, and then using digitalization, especially digitalization has been a game changer in many African countries, especially when it comes to custom digitalization, and even in digitalizing domestic taxes. So the AFDB estimated that just because of time constraints, these are our financing needs. The AFDB estimated that Africa can raise up to $1.4 trillion by just looking inwardly. $1.4 trillion. This can be, you can have the different sources. From diaspora bonds, we can raise as much as $6 billion, which is on the low, which is like a baseline estimates. We can raise more than $6 billion from diaspora bond. From fiscal efficiency gains, we can raise as much as $469 billion. If we fight corruption, it can yield as much as $148 billion. Formalization of the blue economy, the cost of credit ratings, from pension funds, from carbon sequestration. So these are all the different sources of revenue that we can have to finance our development. So another approach will be through fiscal rules or fiscal council, because I heard it in one of the reports that it should be captured in our public finance acts or in our public finance laws. We need to have fiscal rules. Let's say on how much you are. It has been in some countries like Botswana. These are countries where you have it. So it is important that this practice should be promoted in African countries. So to conclude, because of time constraints, we will just say that public debt has increased. It has been more non-concessional and short-term. Yeah, debt is not bad. It depends on how it is structured, the purpose, and it also depends on the country's capacity to carry debt and to repay debt. So there is a need to balance what we do. Invest in growth-enhancing sectors and create sustainable stream of future flows so that we can increase our capacity to service, to make debt payments. So it would, and then we also need to reform the global financial architecture. So this just because of time constraints, maybe I can just cut it here, but so that we can have some Q&A. I think that is where most of these things will come to light. Thank you very much, Sylvia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Keba. Thank you very much, Dr. Keba, for that wonderful presentation. Let's give him again another round of applause. You have really laid out very clearly the debt landscape in Africa. Where are the issues? What are the dynamics? What are the drivers? What are the constraints? What are the challenges to debt issues or debt management in Africa. What are the sources of leakages of financial flows in Africa? The finances which are supposed to, to support development, which are supposed to, to finance economic activities and development in Africa. And you've really laid out a clear picture for us to see that really there is a lot we need to do, because we can't say on one hand there is a lot of resources which are leaking, which are flowing out of the country, out of the countries, but at the same time we are borrowing perhaps more or almost equivalent to what is leaking. So, which means that we have a lot of work to do to stop those leakages, and perhaps that can help to reduce the amount of resources we need to borrow. So, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. Of course, you also pointed out on the the challenges around the global financial architecture. I guess we know that there are other external forces to the deficiencies of the global debt architecture. But we, in Africa, we also have a role to play in order to address those deficiencies. So let's work together to address those deficiencies. Let's find solutions even within this framework, within this event, to address some of those deficiencies, so that eventually we can, resolve the debt challenges we have in Africa. So we are now going to the questions and answers. We'll take not much time. We are trying to keep to the time. So I will take a few hands, and I will request that try to be precise in your question. And I will ask Dr. Kepa to respond to those questions.
Thank you very much, the moderator, for giving me the opportunity. I wish to thank the presenter also for the detailed presentation. I have two questions. I know throughout the presentation, the presenter was emphasizing, that of course debt is not bad, which is generally we agree to. But it is appearing to look bad, to us in the continent. So then how do we make debt to actually look good? So what can he prefer that is necessary for us to make debt to look good? Because it is a big issue for us. Looking at the leakages, from one of the slides, you look at the outflows, that's over 500 billion, so, and the composition of that, issue of corruption and other things are there. And whether debt is used for its intended purpose. If not, what do we put in place to ensure that debt is good? So the second point I want to ask the presenter, of course, looking at the statistics he was showing, the trend is like it starts from the 2010, which is the time when we just, post-peak, the debt levels were low generally. It shows an exponential increase. So perhaps if we see, pre-peak, so we will appreciate how much also efforts countries are making. So because when the post-peak debt levels have already become an incentive So many countries can go to capital market and other areas to build that again. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Maybe if you can say your name so
okay.
that...
Sorry, my name is Karamo Jawara from the Gambia, Central Bank of the Gambia.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Bonjour, je me nomme Moutari Imoussa, ministère de l'économie et des finances du Niger. Je remercie également le docteur pour sa présentation. Moi, c'est une question et des commentaires par rapport à son intervention. Par rapport à la dette, quand il a conclu qu'elle n'est pas une mauvaise en soi, c'est vrai. Mais souvent, c'est dans un emprunt pour financer des projets. Effectivement, souvent, c'est la durée de vie du projet souvent qui peut impacter l'utilisation de la dette là. Je m'explique. Si un projet est conçu pour faire 3 ans, par exemple, si on s'endette et qu'il fasse 5 ans ou plus, vous voyez ce que ça fait, comme ça va, les budgets de fonctionnement, ça va prendre un coût, ce qui fait que ça réduit l'investissement réel qui peut produire de la richesse. Encore, il a parlé de dépréciation de la monnaie locale. C'est vrai, c'est un instrument de politique économique et que chaque État choisisse de le faire ou de ne pas le faire. Les États le font en espérance de stimuler les exportations. Donc, c'est des choix politiques, mais il peut avoir des effets contraires. Mais donc, par conséquent, il faut qu'il y ait des mesures compensatoires pour que les résultats escomptés soient au rendez-vous. Mais la plupart des cas, ce sont des effets contraires qui se produisent. Voilà essentiellement le gros problème. Donc, il appartient aux États vraiment de mener des actions pour que les résultats attendus là soient au rendez-vous. Il y a encore certains emprunts à l'interne où le taux d'intérêt est vraiment élevé. Donc, ce qui augmente le coût de la charge financière. Donc, c'est de privilégier vraiment les taux concessionnels pour que vraiment le pays puisse vraiment emprunter, pour que le coût de la charge ne pèse pas vraiment sur le budget de l'État. Et qu'il appartient aussi aux États d'être responsables de l'utilisation vraiment de la dette. Merci.
Donc, je me présente, c'est Madame Ibrahim Habibatou Moussa Naneto du ministère de l'économie et des finances du Niger. Donc, on remercie le présentateur et dans sa présentation, il avait parlé des fuites de capitaux. Ce n'est pas uniquement la corruption qui fait partie des fuites de capitaux. On constate quand on signe des conventions, au moment d'exécution de ces projets, on constate qu'au niveau de la passation des marchés, il y a des activités où c'est des appels d'offres internationales. Et cela ne favorise pas le tissu économique de notre pays, puisque beaucoup de ces activités, c'est les entreprises internationales qui arrivent à avoir ces marchés. Et du coup, le pays ne profite pas de ces fonds. Donc, il y a fuite de capitaux et ça ne nous aide pas du tout à développer nos entreprises. Donc, je ne sais pas si je demande le présentateur, est-ce qu'il y a possibilité de réviser certaines directives de certains bailleurs pour favoriser les entreprises nationales. Je vous remercie.
If you can be precise in your question in less than 10 seconds, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Nicholas Masendima from Reserve Bank. So, thank you for a very good presentation, quite enlightening. My question is on the emphasis on how to make it work within the context of all the other deficiencies that we have seen in terms of poor tax collection, and also in terms of illicit financial flows. As a matter of policy priority, and also in terms of FDP's approach, in terms of capacity building, don't you think that instead of us emphasizing on how to make that work, why not prioritizing policy measures on improving effective tax collection, as well as even avoiding illicit financial flows? Because even if we try to borrow better, we try to use the borrowed finance, money is better, chances are very high with that kind of illicit financial flows, the monies would still fly out of the countries to the disadvantages of our countries and the whole continent. Thank you.
Monsieur El Hadji Mohamed du ministère des Finances de l'Union des Comores. Merci pour cette bonne présentation. Je voudrais souligner ici l'asymétrie. On court derrière des prêts qui sont très onéreux, avec des taux d'intérêt, avec des devises, termes d'échange qui sont très changeantes, alors qu'il y a une possibilité, je viens de le souligner, avec le financement innovant. Ils sont les transferts de la diaspora, les finances climat, les finances carbone, les fonds verts, l'économie bleue. Donc j'aimerais qu'il approfondisse un peu plus sur ces opportunités qui sont dégagées par ces financements innovants, qui sont pour la plupart des dons, des subventions, qui pourraient financer des projets qui parfois sont dus au dérèglement climatique.
Yes, thank you very much. These are very interesting questions. I think the questions are, we should have spent more time with Q&A. So let me go straight with the first question from my brother Karamo from the Gambia. So he said that debt is appearing bad, and how should we make that good? So that question is linked to, even without debt, if you look at our domestic resources, are we making best use of our domestic resources? Before talking about the things that the resources that we borrowed. So this is connected with fiscal discipline, yeah, and having the governance framework that will make that work for Africa's development. That will make Africa's domestic resources work for Africa's development. Because there are estimates that, for example, when it comes to government investments, there is an inefficiency rate of 39%. That is for every $100 that you invest, that governments invest in infrastructure projects, $39 will be wasted from inefficiencies. So even if you borrow to finance infrastructure projects that are self-liquidating, with the intention of financing or servicing those debt, if you have high levels of inefficiencies internally, it still defeats the purpose. So if, for example, someone wants to advise to make that work for Africa, for Africa's development, we need to use debt to finance, for example, self-liquidating assets, so that we can use the liquidity generated from those assets to service the debt. That can be an advice. But here we are in an environment where even if you want to do that, the amount of wastage and leakage in the system is so high that even if you borrow 100 million, to refinance the 100 million would be, the 100 million would even be complicated. Yeah. So here to make that, here I will just conclude because we have so many questions. To make that work, it is governance, it is fiscal discipline, it is improving efficiencies in government operations. Because if you look at our statement of government operations in most countries, and you look at the amount of money that we spend on goods and services, the amount of money that we spend on recurring expenditures like personal emoluments, the amount of money that we've spent on, let's say, travels and the amount of money that we spend on embassies. You take a typical country, small country like the Gambia, you have like 6 or 7 or 8 embassies in Europe. So even if you don't take loan, even if you use your domestic resources, there are a lot of inefficiencies in the system that will make it very unproductive. So I think there is a systematic problem that we need to address to make that work. So I can move on to the next question, which was debt level. What would have been if it would have been interesting if we saw the debt trend pre-HIPC. That is very true. The only reason why debt fall in the late 2020s was because in the late 2000 was because of HIPC. But Africa generally, debt has always been increasing. Yeah. So that is why I use the figure with the nominal value, not debt to GDP, because debt to GDP ratio will hide a lot of irregularities in the picture. Yeah. So even before HIPC, debt has been increasing in African countries. It is only during the HIPC that you have a decline in the stock of capital, in the stock of debt, and then after HIPC it started increasing again. Yeah. And then there is also another question about exchange rate as the strategy to increase export. It was used by the one who was speaking in French. I did not hear his name. Yeah. So this is true. Exchange rate has been used in many developed countries as a strategy to increase export. But that does not work in most African countries because we do not have that productive base. Remember that to benefit from exchange rate depreciation, there is something that we call in economics the Maslana condition. Yeah. So it is. But what we are trying to say is, we don't want to go technical. But what we are trying to say is, you must have that productivity base you can use, or you must have the capacity to export. That is when a depreciation in the currency can be used as a strategy to increase expectation. In Africa, in most African countries, depreciation is not good. Here, because we are mostly import dependent. We are not an export. We are not very productive when it comes to export. So when there is a depreciation, what happens is prices increases, and then you have it also increases debt sustainability indicators, and then that is how it goes. But I agree in normal circumstances or in productive countries, exchange rate depreciation is a strategy to increase export. And there was also another question on AFDB prioritizing policy measures to address illicit financial flows. I definitely agree. There is not much to say. I agree with you entirely. So this needs to be addressed because of the amount of leakages that we have from our countries. These are things that we need to address. It also connects with the participants from Niger, who stated on the contracts of most of these international consortium. That is why it is very important when signing contracts, let it be reviewed and well negotiated. Because there, for example, you have in many African countries, you have big contractors that do not pay taxes, and they are implementing huge government projects, and they do not pay taxes. Maybe they should not pay tax on revenue, but revenue after cost or your profit, it should be taxable. Yeah, but if during contract negotiations it is negotiated that you do not pay taxes, yeah, then that would be a source. That would be a source of leakage. That would be a source of leakages. And then finally, at least there is from the question from Comoros, which stated, given that the higher interest rates, can we leverage on innovative financing instruments? Yeah, there are innovative financing instruments to finance, for example, public infrastructure projects. Like if you want to build roads, some countries they use the build own operate transfer systems that have been widely used even in African countries. We have these asset recycling programs. Yeah, it is being used in Comoros, I think they have examples of, let's say, the swaps, debt for development swaps. These are things that can be used, but it starts with having the institutions, the right framework, they have the capacity to leverage on this, on this innovative financial instrument. There are examples in Senegal where hospitals, where the government signs PPP contracts with private operators to operate or to use public hospitals. Yeah, these are all innovative ways of financial development, but it comes back to capacity in institutions and political willingness or having the right political setups to use these instruments. But we do not lack the instruments, the innovative financial instruments to finance our development. Yeah, just let me keep it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Keba, for responding to those questions. I saw that there were a number of questions and they continue to grow. I'll request you to keep your questions to the next session because it's also related to what has been discussed here.